What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In this video I want to talk about some non-engine that wasn't good last format but is getting a bit better, a bit more relevant. You can consider playing these cards when last format they weren't that great. And it all kind of revolves around the new meta post Rage of the Abyss, which is really shaped by this card here, Mulcharmy Purulia. But not only that, it's also shaped by Dominus Impulse. So with these two cards being in a lot of people's decks, whether it's main deck or a side deck, there's a lot of non-engine that wasn't really relevant before that I think actually increases in popularity, increases in viability, and I want to talk about those here today. I got about 10 cards for you guys, and yeah, let's just go ahead and talk through them a little bit. So the first two are like the super obvious ones. I want to get them out of the way, revolving around Mulcharmy Purulia, and those are called by and cross out. Like, I don't even want to spend time on these. You know that if everyone's playing Fuwaross, then everyone's playing Call By and Cross Out to not lose to Fuwaross, and that's about it. The first real card that I think is increased in viability and actually value this format is a very obvious card, kind of, or like a card you're probably already considering playing, but I think it's even better now, is Mulcharmy Purulia. And this card I think is better because a lot of decks that try to play around Fuwaross play into Purulia harder. Like if people are playing Floowandereeze, people are playing stuff like Vanquish Soul or Kashtira, those cards don't really lose to Fuwaross at all, but they play into Purulia pretty hard. So I think Purulia is actually in a better spot than it was last format, because last format, like if you Purulia a Yugioh deck, like they'll let you have 2 draws and they make their 8 negate board, right? But for this format, like Purulia will actually go in pretty hard. It'll help you draw into the Fuwaross if you're playing both. You know, a lot of people some decks are already playing Purulia, like Tenpai, but yeah, I think this card actually increases in value, and I think it's actually a viable main deck card if you don't have the Fuwaross. And the reason is, like, another reason it's good that's kind of low-key is if your opponent has Ash and you drop Purulia in like draw or standby phase, they might not Ash it because they're scared that if they Ash the Purulia and then you drop Fuwaross afterwards, they're going to get cooked. So they might just like accept the Purulia for fear of Fuwaross, and that will hugely benefit you. Even if you don't truly have Fuwaross, you can just drop Purulia pretty safely. Okay, same with Call By and Cross Out. First of all, Cross Out, people might not even be playing Purulia, so Cross Out might be dead against your Purulia, which is kind of clutch. And then for the same reason they might not Ash your Purulia, they might not Call By your Purulia either. So yeah, those are a couple bonuses of playing Purulia that I think that were not there last format. Like, it's more likely to resolve, and it's more likely to actually get value. The next 2 cards are hand traps that kind of go together. And I think these are more viable this format because people are just shotgunning stuff in draw and standby phase. It's Cyframe your Gamma. It's your 8th out to Fuwaross. We have 3 Ash, 3 Cross Out, and Called By. So Gamma is another out. I know it's at 1, which kind of sucks, you know, if you are depending on it as an out. But yeah, I think this card is a lot better than it was last format. So yeah, consider this one. But also Cyframe your Epsilon. Epsilon is the trap card negate. And this is not applicable to all decks, but a lot of decks just start with spell cards that summon. And so if we have people relying on Impulse to stop you, for example, if you're playing Branded, Impulse is terrible because it's like 3 more Ash Blossoms against your Branded Fusion. But Epsilon can actually stop the Impulse if you happen to just get to Branded Fusion without a monster on board, and you go Branded Fusion and then they chain Impulse, you can go ahead and chain Epsilon to let your Branded Fusion resolve. It's just an idea, but like last format, this card obviously had like no value, but now it has some value because of Impulse. So if your deck plays into Impulse with no monsters on board, consider this one. The next card is the last hand trap on my list that was nowhere to be seen, honestly, for a couple years. But now it's actually kind of good because of the Azamina cards, is Retaliating C. So Retaliating C is a card where if your opponent activates a spell card that special summons something, you can chain this, summon it to your board, and then it's like Macrocosmos on board, so everything gets banished. And the way you use this card is you chain it to Hallowed Azamina, because Hallowed Azamina has to send something to the graveyard to summon out a fusion monster. So if they go Hollowed Azumina, you chain Retaliating C. Now everything gets banished. They send their Deception, but it gets banished, and because of the way Hollowed Azumina is worded, they do not summon the fusion monster. So, and then they have to deal with a Macrocosmos on board. So this card is super clutch into the Snake Eyes matchup specifically, and it's really just a side deck card for that mostly, or even for like the Chimera deck, it's pretty decent as well. But yeah, you're not really going to see that. But specifically for the Snake Eye matchup, side decking Retaliating Sea is definitely an option. You can also chain it to original Sinful Spoils, which is kind of nice. The next card is going to be a main deck card that has kind of disappeared for a few months, but I think is going to be back in popularity, and that's Kashtira Fenrir. And the reason that this card is back is that it does not play into Impulse or Fuwaross, and it provides a disruption. And if people are kind of in a grind game where they're chaining Fuwaross, they're activating Fuwaross, kind of dropping their card count down, if you don't play into it and you just summon Fenrir, then you at least have a disruption that doesn't draw your opponent a card, and they're down a card, and now you have a disruption, and it's actually kind of valid. So Fenrir, I think, is going to be increasing popularity, and that also goes for Unicorn, which, obviously is just part of the Kashtira engine, but all the Kashtira cards in general don't play into Impulse and Fuwaross. The next card that is somewhat relevant now because of the new meta and the prominence of Fire Kings in the meta, the prominence of Tenpai in the meta, and all that kind of stuff, is going to be Super Polymerization. So because all of these decks are putting out 2 fire monsters at once, we can Super Poly for Garura fairly easily, and that's going to be kind of clutch. Or even for Mudragon, I think, with the Fire King cards, if I'm not mistaken. It's same attribute, different types, right? Yeah, Mudragon. So yeah, Super Poly is definitely a clutch card, and because it's so applicable now, whereas last format, you couldn't really Super Poly the Yubel board very well, you couldn't really Super Poly a Snake Eyes board very well, but now with Fire Kings out and all of that being relevant again, I think Super Poly is something to consider playing in your main deck or side deck, just for those particular matchups. Plus, if you get kind of turn skipped by the Fuwaross, you can just set the Super Poly, and then it's good enough where it could just turn skip your opponent as well if you Super Poly at a good time. The next card that's gotten really popular or a lot stronger because of the Mulcharmy cards is going to be Triple Tactics Thrust. So with Thrust, we have people shotgunning cards in the draw phase, in the standby phase, like the Chummies, Dimension Shifter, and so forth. So we can just, if you're going to get turn skipped, you can Thrust for a turn skip of your own, whether that is different Dimension Ground to stop the graveyard-based decks like Snake Eye and Yubel, or Dimensional Barrier to stop the shifter decks like Tenpai. You D-Barrier Call Synchro. For Ritual Beast, you D-Barrier Call Fusion. So like having 1 copy of each trap in your side at least, and then 3 copies of Thrust in the side for when you go first. So if your opponent drops one of the turn skippy cards on you, you can at least Thrust to put up a chance to make it till next turn, and that could be pretty clutch. The last card I want to talk about is a extra deck card, but it is generic, and that's going to be Typhon. So Typhon is good when people are making half boards, and then it's kind of more of a grindy game. So a lot of people will start making half boards if you hit them with the Charmy cards. So that means Typhon is going to be able to go in pretty hard, especially like if your opponent's making a half board and then they also have a bunch of hand traps. Like you can play into them, eat up their hand traps, and then just Typhon clear 2 monsters, 1 by battle, 1 by bouncing, and then you're in a really good position to leave at least Typhon on your field. So yeah, I think Typhon is going to be quite a bit better now than it was last format. Last format basically didn't see any play at all in the meta decks, but now I can see this having a space at least in some of the meta decks. But yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for the cards that are relevant. So we have the Charmy related cards, we have Charmy itself, the Purulia, we have the Psyframe cards, Retaliating Sea, Kashtira, Super Poly, Triple Tactics Thrust, and Typhon, and of course the 2 trap cards to search with the Thrust. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and hopefully this is a little bit helpful to you. Let me know what you guys think. If there are any cards that are also going to be relevant, more so than last format, let me know in the comments below. And with that, we'll catch you in the next one.